Hi everyone, welcome back to episode 6 of the first World Championship match played between Steinitz and Zukertort series. After 5 games, Zukertort is now leading with 4 to 1 wins, extra 3 wins. Now, today we are going to study the game 6 of this match. Steinitz, after getting completely outplayed in the game 5, is now very desperate to come back in the match. Let us see how Steinitz handled this situation. Steinitz and Zukertort in Game 6 repeated the Berlin defense. If you want to study more about this opening, you can check our episode 4. I will put the link in the description below. Now in this position, Steinitz deviated by playing the move bishop d3. In game 4, he had played the move bishop f1, trying to develop this bishop by moving the pawn on this diagonal. But by playing bishop d3, now white intends to implement a different plan. He wants to develop the bishop from b2 on this long diagonal. Okay, after bishop d3, black attacked the rook in the center. Now the rook did not come all the way back to the first rank, but it stopped at e3. What is the idea behind this? White wants to keep the ideas of going to the king's side and building that attack here on g and h lines open. So after rook e3, black played g6 right away, keeping this diagonal closed, trying to keep this g file closed and keeping this bishop on the dark squares to control them. After g6, white, according to the plan, developed on the queen side b3. A few normal moves were played. Queen came to f3, trying to build the attack on the king side. Bishop g5 was played. Now, this combination of playing rook e8 and bishop g5, I'm not a big fan of, because this is provoking white to exchange the rook. Now, what kind of an advantage does white have here? If you look carefully, white is leading in development. Now, when you lead in development, the one who has lesser development, that is black in our case, should avoid exchanging the developed pieces of his. Now, if you see, black's developed pieces are these. And if he is provoking white to exchange the developed pieces, then after the exchanges, what will be left is white will have 3 developed pieces. The fourth one is coming out soon, whereas black's pieces are still undeveloped. So basically, you need to understand this. If you are having a lead in development, you should always try to exchange the developed pieces of your opponents and make him play with the undeveloped pieces left on the board. Okay, after knight into e8, the bishop came out. c6, this original idea of controlling the center on the light squares. Here, there is one interesting variation. After bishop b2, if you check carefully, this pawn on d2 is hanging. But can black take it? Instead of c6, can he play bishop into d2? I don't think so. It's a very bad move because black is not focusing on his development of these passive pieces. Now what will happen is white is going to play bishop c4 attacking this. Okay, black cannot play d5. The pawn is hanging. So here there are 2 moves that black can play. He can play either queen e7 to defend this or knight d6. If he plays queen e7, there is knight e4 attacking the bishop, eyeing on the dark squares here. Okay, the bishop goes back to h6. Now comes the move rook e1. Now if you see, 5 pieces of white are into this attack, whereas black's undeveloped pieces are helpless. They cannot defend this whole attack. Now knight f6 is threatened, winning the queen. There is no way that black could defend this attack and white is simply winning. For example, let's say if he plays simply king f8, now white cannot move this knight with a check. So this rook needs to be moved to a place where it will be supported with some piece, so that now white is ready to move this knight to f6, let's say. For example, if he plays something like d6, now knight f6 can be played because the rook is not hanging anymore like it was on e1. Another defense here is knight d6, attacking this bishop and supporting this pawn. If you can pause here and find this next move, that would be really awesome. Okay, if you have found knight e4, then that's a very strong indication that you are improving. Knight e4 has got multiple ideas. First of all, it is attacking this bishop. This knight is also attacking, or what you can say is harassing this defender of this weakness f7. And at the same time, this knight is intending to go to f6. Okay, so if black takes knight into c4 here, there is knight f6 check. The king cannot go here. If the king goes to this diagonal on g7 or h8, let's say he goes here, white will simply take this, and on this diagonal, black is absolutely helpless. Okay, if he plays something like d6 to develop, white can play here queen d5, attacking this bishop. Okay, after queen d5, if the bishop goes here, queen into f7, and these pieces are not coming to defend this king. Mate is inevitable. Okay, if he plays bishop g7 here, there is knight e8 attacking this bishop. He has to take, and then there is this mate. Okay, so bishop into d2 was a very careless move, which he definitely knew about, and he did not play it. Now, after bishop b2, he continued to develop his queen side. He wants to play d5 now to control e4 square, so the knight cannot jump here. But he is just one move late. Before letting black play d5, white immediately pounces on the opportunity and plays knight e4. Now, what white wants is to get rid of this dark square bishop controlling the dark squares on the king side. White wants to enter here and use all his pieces to build the strong attack on the king side. Bishop went back to e7, keeping an eye on this f6 square. Okay, now you need to just maneuver the queen on this diagonal to provoke more weaknesses. So he played queen e3. After d5, ignoring the attack, white's queen went to the d4 square, centralizing and creating this battery on this long diagonal. He can't take, obviously, because there is a mate threatened on h8. Okay, so queen d4, black had to play f6, which white wanted black to play. Now, after f6, another set of light squares is also weakened. Okay, white went for knight g3. He wanted to defend this knight as it was attacked. Black developed his queen side with bishop e6. Okay, after bishop e6, rook e1 was played. Knight g7. Now this next plan I really like. This plan we have already discussed in our earlier episodes. If you are attentive enough, I would challenge you to pause here and find the right plan. If you have found h4, that is bang on the correct idea. White wants to play h4 and to create more erosions on the king side. Black went for queen d7. White, according to the plan, went ahead with the h pawn h5. Bishop to f7, guarding this point. Okay, if black takes g into h5, okay, he's winning a pawn, but the position, the structure is completely ruined, and this diagonal cannot be challenged anymore. White is intending now to go to h6 and attack h7, which cannot be easily defended. If f5 is played to close this diagonal, then certainly this diagonal gets opened up, and then there are threats on the g7 spot. Okay, after h5, black went for bishop f7. H into g6, bishop into g6. White went back to queen e3, attacking the bishop on e7. King came to f7, defending e7. Okay, black could have also played rook e8, but I think black did not want his king to stay there where the g file is open. Instead, the king would prefer to come on f7, guard these weak squares, and also take the support of this f6 point. And it is not open on the f file. After king f7, white played a few normal moves trying to build on the king side. Let's say queen f4, rook e8, rook e3, knight f8. This rook was hanging, so he just put the rook to e3 where it is protected, and there are no threats on this e file. Now after knight e6, queen went to g4, knight f8, knight f5, building up, slowly getting more pieces gathering around this black's king on the king side. Bishop c5. Okay, here there is an interesting moment. White played knight h6, king g7, knight f5, king f7, knight h6, king g7, and they repeated this knight h6 and king g7, knight f5, king f7 for a lot of times. But in 1886, this rule of threefold repetition was not in force. So they could not accept a draw here, or the arbiters could not intervene and conclude this game as a draw. So bishop into g6, they had to continue. Queen into g4, knight into g4, rook into e3. Okay, he can take bishop into e3, but then this is also hanging. Can take this, this, and white is simply up a piece. So he had to take rook into e3, after which f into e3, king into g6, and then white ended up being a pawn up in this endgame. So this is our critical position here. White has transformed his advantage, which was dynamic in nature. He had some attacking prospects, and now the attacking prospects are completely gone. But what has he gained? He has gained an extra pawn. So that's a positional long-term advantage. Now the only part which is remaining for white is to convert this advantage into the win. We will see how white managed to do it. Okay, bishop b4. White doesn't want to give up the pawn. d3, knight e6. Okay, which is the most important piece in the end game? The king, which we try and keep it in the corner in the openings and middle games. But in end games, the king has to be centralized. One of the most important end game principles. After king f2, h5. Okay, I'm not a big fan of this next move g4. I'll tell you why. Okay, white is a pawn up. White is trying to play for a win. Black is the one who's trying to defend the position and try to draw the game. Okay, black is not playing for a win for sure. But in these situations, what the winning side should do is try to minimize the exchange of pawns. The more you exchange pawns, you're going towards a drawish position. Black should have taken this pawn h into g4, making sure that the whole pawn cluster is just on the one side. Okay, white has this extra pawn. White still has a few winning chances here. But if he had played h into g4, black could have registered better. Black played h4 here, trying to create this passed pawn. But I don't think this is going to create any threats. Instead of creating a few threats, the pawn on h4 is just going to become a weakness. Knight h5 was played. Now white has to get the king here to start attacking this pawn. So king g2, c5. Okay, black might think about playing d4 and block this bishop's diagonal. So the bishop goes to f6, immediately attacking h4. Knight g5, blocking this diagonal. Bishop into g5, king into g5, king h3. This is a very important moment here. Giving up the bishop and transposing the position into a knight versus bishop endgame. Now the knight is going to dominate this bishop because knights need outposts. If you check carefully, this knight has good outposts on f5 and h5. After king g5, king h3, bishop e5 was played. He's trying to block this knight on h5. But that's of no use because the knight can come out from f4. If he tries to take this pawn, white is going to take this pawn and use this g pawn as the winning weapon. After bishop into f4, e into f4, king into f4, king into h4, this pawn cannot be stopped. Okay, so he did not take, obviously he played d4, trying to undermine this knight on f4. White played knight e6 check, king f6, e into d4. If he takes this, white is going to take. Let's see this variation. And again, white is 2 pawns up with a simple passed pawn on the g file and a potential passed pawn on the d file as well. Clearly winning position. So black decided to keep these minor pieces on the board and keep fighting for a draw. Okay, the knight went to c5, attacking this point. He could have played b6, but then knight d7 check, forking the king and bishop, exchanging the minor pieces, again entering into the king and pawn endgame, which is clearly winning for white. So black decided to play king g5, defend this pawn, and give up this pawn. White took knight into b7. And if you look at this position, white is already 2 pawns up now. The knight is not dominated by the bishop. And one more important aspect in this position implemented by Steinitz is he has kept all his pawns on the light squares, where this dark square bishop is useless and cannot attack. Okay, after king f4, knight a5, Bishop f6. These are just few normal moves to regroup his pieces and try to create passed pawns. When you have extra pawns, create passed pawns and they will act as weakness for your opponent. Knight c6, king e3, knight into a7, king d2. Black is trying to win these pawns and create a passed pawn for his own. But black is too late here. I mean, white can simply come and sacrifice his knight for the d pawn as well. White has got a lot of passed pawns, and this bishop cannot control all of them. The king will be somewhere behind the third rank, first, second, or the third rank when this knight is going to be sacrificed. And then the king being on the second rank and the third ranks, these pawns are not going to be stopped by the king, and the bishop would be just lonely sitting in the center looking at both the sides and will be overloaded. We'll see what happened. Knight c6, king into c2, a4, king into, okay, he has two options. He decided to take the d3 pawn. Even if he takes this pawn is just too fast. The bishop cannot stop. The bishop cannot come here because this square is controlled. So king into d3, knight b4 check, king e2, a5, bishop e7, knight d5. White is saying, you can push d3, alright, I don't care. I can just play this check. This takes. Now, white can play a6. Black has to play bishop c5. And who's going to stop this pawn? g5. As I have already told you, the king is going to be on the third rank when the knight is going to be sacrificed. The king cannot catch this pawn. This pawn is unstoppable. So he played king f3 instead of pushing d3 and getting into this fork. White went for knight into e7, d3. This knight is easily in the range to control this pawn. Knight d5. Coming back to c3 and being ready to sacrifice. So let's say he plays this. Knight here. He goes here. a6. This. If he keeps attacking this knight, it's not a draw. Should not go here, but he should go far away from the king where the king cannot attack. And he's going to take another 3 moves to attack this knight. Until that point, you can just queen. If he plays d1 queens, takes, white is simply winning the game. So with this game, Steinitz fought back, came back in the match, and the score now is 4-2 wins. Steinitz had lost the momentum, but I think he has gained the momentum back. The match has now become a lot more interesting than it was as Steinitz has got back his momentum. Thanks a lot for watching and see you in the next episode, guys. Do like the video if you have found it instructive and subscribe to our channel. It would motivate us to work more in the right direction.